Okay, so this is exciting. This is our third conversation with the Feathered Serpent. Last time we touched on a lot, and I think that can expand on what we talked about is the subject of the Harmony projects, what that is, and how that ties into what's going on right now. And like what I love about your teaching, and it's something I did with my practice, is you can back up everything you've shared with me and others. And all you do is you say, like, look, I've got a library and everything I've talked about has been explained already in books, but it's not like you've read them and then you talk about it. It's like you just come out and you just share all of this knowledge, and then we can do our own research through books, through videos online, through anything, and have all of this confirmed. And what's been really cool with our journey is that you'll talk about something that's either been on my mind, so you just tune into that, and or you talk about something and then a couple days later in your research you'll find other avenues that are saying the exact same thing. And this happened to us this past week with this guy recording an AI response to his question about, how do you imprison a planet? What would you do if, so I would love for you to kind of go over that real quick about what that video was, but then also talk about AI.
This is not the only source. People should check out Cliff High, or as I like to call him, Uncle Cliff. Cliff High is, obviously a master. He's the inventor and creator of something called predictive linguistics. He has some controversial views, but if you take the time to listen carefully, you'll find that the controversy isn't as scary as it initially looks. And also, he's not saying things from a position of hatred, but more from a position of factual statements. And a lot of people get hung up on his terminology. I'm not going to get into the terminology, but it's vulnerable to the attack of anti-Semitism, which in and of itself is a rabbit hole of epic proportions, which I don't think we have the time to go into here. But essentially, Cliff High talks about all the things you just asked. And he, having studied the ancient Sanskrit texts, is in a position to explain to people what it is when the universe seems to be in alignment with your thoughts. And that's called a qualia. When you've done sufficient work to align the inner with the outer, there will be an understanding that the universe talks to you back and forth, and there's a dialogue. Because you start to switch your understanding from a grit-based or materialistic viewpoint to an ontological viewpoint, which is the viewpoint that everything is consciousness. Your rocks, rivers, everything is made of consciousness energy. And as it's from one source, it is all connected. So this is where the origin of shamanism comes from, the origin of a lot of societies that understood that information can flow from seemingly disconnected things because we're all connected in a essentially consciousness field. Okay, so that explains how, and it goes like this: the more in alignment you are with universe, the more this happens. So this happens on a frequent basis for people who have attained a level of skill, erroneously called mastery by some who are just starting this journey, but nonetheless have attained a certain level of practice within themselves, that this reality is a constant state. This interaction with universe and universal mind is a constant state. And so Cliff explains that quite well. He also explains what AI is and how AI isn't a threat. What modern AI is simply a large language model, and it's simply basically like 100 monkeys in a room churning out answers given a limited data set. And it's not capable of independent thought. But what AI can do is it can see through data very quickly because it's not as clouded by filters such as human minds are. So when human minds have presupposed supposition in place that may be operating on a subliminal or subconscious level, such as Russia's bad and will always be bad, or Trump is bad and will always be bad, or bears are bad and will always be bad, and then you get information to the contrary, you enter a state of cognitive dissonance, which means your brain literally can't process the fact that you were incorrect and you need to update your files. Okay, whereas an AI is not suffering from this problem. It doesn't say, well, I just found out Jesus was an alien, so I can't believe that because that would undermine all my religious beliefs.
Right, it's not going through any personal filters.
Yeah, it's not going through any personal filters. So that's what's interesting. When this totally random person asked an AI, how would you make Earth into a prison planet? It just so perfectly dovetails into reality. What's the reason for that? Well, the reason for that is because it's just assembling the information that's there in a cogent point-form plan. And look, it's everything that's happening on Earth right now. That's not a coincidence. That's because that's actually going on. Okay. And, not all, like if you ask 6 AIs a question, you'll get 6 different answers. And also the way you prompt it will significantly influence the outcome. And so what this person did was he said, assume the role of, an entity that wanted to turn Earth into a prison planet. What would you do? The interesting thing is it talks about the Luciferian doctrine.
Yeah.
And that's something important to know, that there is a group out there that has a doctrine. And when you look at this doctrine, it matches up with a lot of what you see out your windows right now. Okay, so interestingly enough, this totally random guy asked an AI to figure out how to make Earth a prison planet, and it coincidentally laid out exactly what's happening. Now, here's another weird coincidence. The Harmony Project webpage and the Harmony Project concept was done in 2002 in 15 minutes. How does it so perfectly line up as a solution to this guy here, who I don't know, who I didn't have any contact with, who had no understanding of the Harmony Project, yet his AI creates a problem which the Harmony Project is the exact solution for.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that the first thing it says separate the humans from the ether and then mess up the Earth grid.
Yeah.
Well, Rudolf Steiner, about 100 years ago, said that they were already working on a vaccine to cut people off from their higher self. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what he means about disconnecting the ether. Essentially, the short answer is we're multidimensional beings that have a symbiosis with this physical body, and this symbiosis allows us to have a separate state of reality for a while, the illusion of individuality. Okay, and this biotechnology that we are using right now to have this experience, and it is a technology and it was created, are superiors to all forms of current technology and Luciferian technology, because Luciferian technology can only copy what creation has already created.
Right.
Okay? It is not an originator creative force. It is a parasitic force.
Right. And they need humans because we have the ability to create.
All things from creation have the ability to create.
Right.
All things that are not insane. And insanity is just described as something that is essentially 180 degrees away from what it was intended to be. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially the Luciferian position. So the bottom line is that they've already put into books that their goal was to cut off the other half of our reality so that we're isolated. Now, why would they do that? Because you can't really manipulate the game down here in third dimensional space when there is a hyperlink to creation that every soul can access, and every soul can get back on track if they get off track. How do you create a artificial reality within the supra reality if you cannot sever that connection? So they have been trying for millennia to sever this connection. They've never been successful, nor will they ever be successful. And that is phase 1. Phase 2 is to destroy the Earth grid. Why? Because the Schumann Resonance frequency, as Cliff mentions, a mathematician already did the work to prove the effects of the Schumann Resonance frequency, which is the resonance frequency of the Earth, mm-hmm. and the interconnectedness. And that was Persinger, by the way. So if you listen carefully to Cliff, you'll notice that he talks about Persinger. Persinger did the mathematical treatise to prove that the Schumann resonance frequency is one of the mechanisms that the ecosystem uses to stay in communication with itself.
Right.
Okay? And when we are a part of that, there's no imbalance on Earth. When we have disconnected from this, there starts to be all sorts of craziness, because, of course, that's what would happen. Just like if you couldn't communicate with people around you, there'd be chaos, because how is anything supposed to come about when there's no way to communicate the goal? And there would just be pure chaos, pure anarchy. And that's essentially what's happening. So the fact that the Harmony Project was told to me as the solution, and if you read the content of the website, it counteracts everything that AI says it would do. So you have a problem and you have a solution. If people are really interested in doing the solution, it's like if you're 500 pounds and you say you want to lose weight. Okay, if that's a true statement, then when somebody shows up with a plan and says, okay, so I'm a representative of the universe. Here's the plan you asked for. How do you lose 500 pounds? Here you go. And you're like, nope, don't want it.
Yeah.
Well, you haven't got to the point where you've hit rock bottom where you really want the solution. Your cup isn't emptied. You're not really serious. You want to pretend to have a solution. And unfortunately, that's the reason for the pain and suffering part of things. Pain and suffering go hand in hand with learning because it makes that learning real. And if you didn't have pain and suffering with that learning, there wouldn't be any relevancy to the lesson.
Yes, I remember you talking about this.
Yeah, is this the way it is on every level? No, because when you're at a sufficient maturity level, this isn't required.
Right.
But when you are essentially a spiritual adolescent, which most souls are on the planet right now, then you need to be taught things in a very base way. Okay. It's why no little aliens and no little fairies are going to come down here on Earth and wave their little magic wand and fix what we've done to this planet, because there would be no lesson. Just like there'd be no lesson if a little fairy went and cleaned up your house every day. Why would you have to be organized? Why would you have to learn how to be healthy and functional if something was doing it all for you?
Right. And something that's going around right now that I also believed, but maybe there's a partial truth to it. But again, there's a lot of partial truths, right? And then they manipulate the balance or the most of that. So one of that is like this 5D reality. And like we're all ascending to the 5th dimension and we can not have to endure.
Yeah, it's a bunch of crap, right? So it's a bunch of pure bullshit that they use all sorts of like names and labels to get people to not want to be where they are now. Okay. Look, we're in 3rd dimensional reality, and that is described because it's a certain locked in viewpoint, length, breadth, width, that is unalterable. And when they say things like 5D, it's all a little bit occult in the sense that they want to use these labels to shift people in certain directions. The Hopi talk about the world being destroyed 4 times. So is 5D reflective of the fact that we've gone through 5 dimensions of changes? Mm-hmm. Possibly, but it creates misunderstanding. It makes people think that we're just going to like transition and go into this like higher plane where this perfect Earth is, and we're just going to phase there, kind of like leaving all of our poison and toxicity behind in the lower dimension. That's all poppycock. Okay, that's not what this whole point is. And I mean, certainly a lot of people will be shifting into a higher dimension when they corporally die off this planet and go and occupy the actual dimension where we reside for most of space-time. Because these blips here into the 3rd dimensional reality where we can experience the illusion of individualism, they're very, very temporary. They're like a blink of an eye, cosmically speaking, when you're on the other side and time is perceived very differently. These things are just like little blips, like blip. Okay, so that's one of the information they cut off too, is this dual nature of our existence, how we spend part of it as individuals in an illusionary construct, and then part of it as an integrated energetic consciousness. But that cycle never ends. That we never diminish, we never die. So how can you manipulate people if they know that? Right. So part of the first religions were to cut off this other part where we live forever, and they don't mention that. And instead they say, we're the keepers of forever. If you don't do what we say, the high priests say, we're going to control your forever. Of course, that is all poppycock. So 5-dimensional stuff is really a misnomer. It's all misleading because it's trying to get people away from understanding that everything is perfect in creation. Mm-hmm. What's not perfect is your understanding of perfection.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we all sit here in this perfect creation and we all judge it like we know so much, and we are the arbiters of what is right and what is wrong. And I mean, the Japanese have a concept, wabi-sabi. It's a Zazen type concept of the perfectly imperfect, or the imperfect perfection, right? And that is essentially what we live in, and that is nothing is broken here. So instead of looking at things going, oh, that's broken, that should be this way, that should be this way, people as a meditative exercise would do well to look at it as, okay, so it's perfect. Why does that make sense? I don't really understand why this makes sense now, but I trust that it does.
Right. So pause.
Yeah,
This is that statement is huge. So say it again. People should, instead of perceiving it this way.
Yeah, instead of judging it and going, well, I have an inner belief of how things should be, and the outer world isn't conforming to that, so it's broken. Instead of one perspective, that's the perspective of a youthful being judging their parents, you know? And this is why they say the older you get, the smarter your father becomes, right? Because you get enough experience to go, oh, so maybe he wasn't being an ass when he told me not to drive the car when I was drinking. Okay, so it's like this: as we get more perspective and as we see more of creation for what it really is, we come to understand that everything is perfect.
Right.
A lot of near-death experiencers will say, once you're on the other side and you have the download of what everything is and what you've been in the past lives and all of this stuff, and you look at it instead of the small little perspective you're inhabiting now, you look at the entirety of things and you go, oh, well, it makes perfect sense.
Right.
Right.
So instead of this, ask,
why does this make sense? Why is this happening? You know, and it is perfect. So why would humanity go through these cycles of spiritual winter and then have a spiritual spring and summer? And why would we go through these cycles of undulation, of darkness and light, etc.? Well, because it all makes perfect sense. That's why. That's why they encoded it in the Yin-Yang symbol. I mean, what I realized when I had done sufficient meditation, you know, I had been lucky enough to every day for 5 years in a beautiful spot by a waterfall do Qigong. And one day after doing this, I sat down by the waterfall and it, you know, this whole encyclopedia of knowledge came to me about the Yin-Yang symbol. And I realized, whoa, why didn't this happen? I mean, literally, I've looked at a Yin-Yang symbol. Why didn't it happen before? Well, because I hadn't done the internal work to align my frequency with the frequency contained in the symbol. And then I realized, well, if this is the case, we're not alone. All of these ancient symbols have been encoded with holographic knowledge, that once you have done the work to match the frequency internally to the external graphic, all this knowledge comes through. You know, so you look at the Yin-Yang symbol. Well, this symbol will tell you everything you need to know about the universe. Okay. It's a free energy engine. It's a gravitic engine. It's a map of reality. So many things all contained in one symbol. Okay. And so we're not alone. We've never been alone. None of this is accidental. It's all perfect and it makes perfect sense. So, you know, I know we can't understand that yet. We could do ourselves a lot of good by relaxing into that awareness. And being patient, because one of the things you'll note with this link about what the computer is said to do to create a prison planet is to magnify fear. Okay, magnify fear. Fear as an emotion is useful, but when it is out of context and out of balance with all the other emotions, it can create a state of mental retardation, and one where we sit there and we create this feedback loop where everything seems hopeless. Okay, and that's the trick. The trick of the psychic vampire is you have to be tricked into defeating yourself. Right. Okay. And the truth is that this is all trickery. The good news is that metaphysically, the metaphysical winter has ended. The metaphysical spring has begun. And what will be happening will become self-evident, just like, and this is the point, right? How do you know reality from illusion? Well, illusion requires you to believe in it. Reality does not. Right. Okay, so you may disbelieve in an avalanche, but if you stand in that thing's way, you're going to be covered in this event, whether you believe in it or not.
In the reality of the avalanche.
Right. And just like with the, you know, spiritual and energetic springs and seasons on this planet, you may, you know, be thinking winter's going to last forever, but when, you know, the trees start blooming and when the snow starts melting and when people's behaviors start shifting as older souls are born onto the planet that know things that you don't have to teach them, that they inherently know, well, reality is going to change, whether you believe in it or not.
Right.
And that is the proof that this is not an internal delusion, that this is a very real event, And you can either choose to go with the flow of this event, or you can choose to try to oppose it. If you oppose this event, you'll be learning a valuable but short lesson.
Yeah. And what I have hanging on my wall is from the Hopis and what the elders have said, what it will happen. And the biggest thing that I am trying to remind myself every single day, because again, programming, what we've been programmed with, is deep. And even having the awareness that you're programmed doesn't mean all of a sudden that the programs just disappear and you're, healed and can just start anew. It's work, that I'm dedicated to this work. And, so what I keep reminding myself is to not be attached and to let go of what we've known. And the biggest thing and what I am proud of essentially is that I've grown my faith in things unseen and unknown and uncertain. My faith has carried me in that connection with the universe, and really letting go, knowing that I cannot possibly know all of the outcomes, and I just choose to be guided. But we have to do that work so that when that guidance comes, we can recognize it.
Brain thing too, right? I mean, you know, left and right brain have to sync up, otherwise you might be going insane. And one of the paths of like coming out of the sleep, coming out of the brainwashing, is this sense of confusion. Now you don't know what to believe, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you check your math? Well, you check your math by reconciling the left and the right hemispheres. That's what the unified field theory is where both sides come together. It's why they divided everything in university into separate components, because then you can never see the unified field theory. You can only see the unified field theory if you have equal measures of, left and right brain, equal measures of, logic and spiritual awareness in the analysis. And that is what is lacking in most scientists, which is why they can't see the obvious. And, so faith is important. It's important to provide you with an experience that is less stressful than it could be. But if you have faith and without critical thinking, without deductive reasoning, without observational analysis, then you can go insane. That's how people say, well, my faith tells me to murder children. Well, that's nice, but your faith is batshit crazy.
Right.
And you would know that if you step back from your faith and looked at the math, okay? And so I believe not in the supremacy of one side or the other, but in the integration of both sides.
Right.
So faith is important. Faith allows one to go through the experience with a smile on your face. Okay. Right. And no matter what kind of rapids you're going down, you have faith, and therefore you can find the joy in the experience. Well, okay. Well, that doesn't mean if you see a big log coming along in the rapids and you go, well, oh shit, this course I'm on is going to plow me right into that log. Well, you don't just say, well, I just going to trust universe to not make that happen. You have to take the reins.
Right.
You have to steer your kayak around that log and avoid that problem. And that is why we've been given both of these faculties.
Right.
It's about the unity of those two forces, and one should never abandon the processes of critical thinking when you're looking at universe.
Right.
I mean, this is a continually interactive process. Say you meet a charismatic person, say they explain a lot of things and they say, come to this island and drink this Kool-Aid. Well, I mean, you can't just go on faith, because that's how people get taken advantage of. Okay. You have to say, well, okay, so he's saying this and he's saying that, but does that make sense? Does that does that add up? Because if it's the right answer, both your right hemisphere, your intuition, and your logical side will agree that the answer is 1 + 1 is 3, right? They will agree on that reality. And so
time will reveal that truth.
Yeah, that's the other thing for everybody to understand. Time does not work for the con man. Time does not work for the liar. Why do you think all liars and con men want to pressure and make time, an issue? Because time works for the truth. So time reveals all deception. Time reveals all. So only con men and liars fear time. No truth teller, no truth speaker, no truthful communicator ever worries about things taking time. Okay? And that's why I'm like confident that as things have gone on, you have to understand, 12 years ago, the things I was saying sounded more batshit crazy than they do now. Okay. But every day that goes by now, they sound more and more sane. Okay. So that's an example of how, if you're like, telling something to your children, well, just wait, when you're 21 and you've got bills to pay, you'll understand why, mommy or daddy has a beer at the end of the night because it's so stressful, and they're like, no, I will never drink. I would never do that. I would never do that. Well, and then they get to be that age and then they start dealing with that stress. And then they realize, oh, well, actually, yeah, mom and dad aren't crazy because they did these things. They're just dealing with the stress. Okay. And so as a parent, you worry that your kid's going to get to be 20 and then not agree with you. Well, no, that they are. That once they have experienced the same sort of reality, that they'll start to agree with you. And, that's where that old adage comes from, that says, the older I get, the smarter my father becomes, right?
Right.
I mean, and remember, creation is a dual entity comprised of a female energy and a masculine energy. But this entity is, by all definitions, a supreme consciousness. And as such, there is no mistakes.
Right. Everything is perfect.
Everything is perfect. And, as a meditative exercise, I did that for 10 years, right? When anybody asked me how I was doing, or any opportunity from the universe that would elicit, well, how are you, and comment on that, my answer was the same for 10 years, which was perfect. Now, the first 2 years, that's a projection, a lie, a creation, but that became an inner awareness by constantly repeating it every day, anytime universe elicited the response, like a mantra, which we'll go into later, how to utilize the technology we've been given to create a manifestation matrix. These are some of the things that have been kept concealed but are being revealed now in light topics like The Secret and stuff like this. But essentially, mantras are a component of this. And, beating a drum constantly and authentically will soon have the material reality around you being in alignment with that. And, after about 2 years, I started to not just say it as a word, but I started to understand that as maybe misaligned as things seem to be in the moment, they were perfect. Sometimes, you lose a job here and you're like, why? But then 3 months down the road, another opportunity comes up. And then looking back in hindsight, you go, oh, that was perfect that I lost that job, because that loss of that job allowed me to be in alignment for this job or this opportunity over here. Oh, see, it's all perfect. We need to remember those times while we're in the experience of losing the job in the first place.
Right. Yeah, because those things, we're here to have that experience. We're here to experience those challenges, but at the same time, it would be very helpful to remember that there's a larger plan, that, everything in creation is perfect. And then to ask, now, why does this make sense?
Right. And that's another important thing is that this perfection, and why would, so the answers aren't that complicated. But why do people suffer from an inability to accept them? Well, the big reason is because there's no victimization possible when you understand these informations. And we've been allowed to become addicted to victimization modalities, okay? And when you can say to somebody, I'm a victim, and they lift you up and they pack you around and they take all your cares away, it's a very powerful narcotic to give up.
Right.
And when you come to the understanding that you have chosen this life, you have largely planned your own life out, all of the negatives, and anybody who wants to research this, go on YouTube and research near-death experiences. Not all near-death experiences are equal. I only count the ones where there's been a brain death for a significant period of time, and there's been complications where the person shouldn't have come back without severe mental trauma, and yet they come back and there's no mental trauma at all, there's no physical trauma. I look at those sources, and those sources are pretty much all in alignment with what they say. You plan everything, including all your pain that you experience down here.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to make sense until you understand what they're saying, which is, well, what are we? We are immortal entities